Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Dustin Smith, and today I wanted to share with you how the book of Genesis is going to show the patriarchs, namely Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, being involved in the process of God restoring Eden. Now, this might be new to you, and it's probably going to be new to a lot of people, but the portrayal of Eden, that is, God dwelling in the midst of his people in a sanctuary paradise, is not just reserved for Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. Yes, it's there. And because of sin and disobedience, human beings lose that vocation of being rulers of God's creation and priests over the realm of Eden, and they get kicked out of Eden. But God is in the process of restoring human beings to the original intention, and he has a plan to deal with sin and death, at least from the perspective of the narrative of the book of Genesis, that, of course, has been dealt with according to the death of Jesus Christ on the cross and his resurrection from the dead. That's been accomplished. But there's some interesting things that the book of Genesis tells us about how God is already setting in motion his plan to bring his human beings back into a relationship with him in the way that God had originally had with human beings in Eden, particularly with God coming and dwelling on earth in the midst of his people. And that's what we see in Genesis chapters 1 through 3. And that is what we see at the end of the Bible, to where God is again dwelling on a renewed earth with his glorified human beings. And Jesus is exalted to the head of the human race as the Messiah. So I don't want to spend all the time talking about this, but let's look at some of the evidence that we actually have, because I think that one of the reasons why people have not seen this in Genesis is because there's not one single verse that spells this out. You have to take all of the evidence and you have to put all of it on the table and look at it all on the table to say, okay, what is the best way to explain all of this evidence? And I think it's pretty compelling. So you can let me know what you think in the comments below, what you think of this. So let's begin by talking about Eden as a sanctuary. All right. This is not something that people typically think about, but I think it's actually fairly easy to demonstrate. All right. So the first thing that we'll notice, and this is just 3 points out of 10 that we possibly can make. So Eden possessed a tripartite structure. And the tripartite structure of Eden was just like the tripartite structure of the Jerusalem temple. I don't just mean that there are 3 different parts, but there are 3 parts that continually go closer and closer into the very presence of God. So we can see with the Jerusalem temple, we know that there's an outer court, and we know you move inside the temple building, and then you move inside into the Holy of Holies. And so you have a 3-part structure. And as you go in further, you get closer and closer to the presence of God. Well, the same thing we can see in the book of Genesis, starting in chapter 2, verse 8, where the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, planted a garden towards the east in Eden, and there he placed the man whom he had formed. So you have the world, and then within the world, God has Eden, a location in the world. And then inside Eden is actually a garden. So we call it the Garden of Eden, but it's actually the garden that's actually inside Eden. So you have the outer world, you have Eden, and then you have the garden that's actually inside Eden. And that garden functions as a sanctuary where human beings were able to interact with God. Okay, so that shows that Eden is already starting to show, or at least foreshadow, the portrayal of a temple, a place where God is going to dwell in the midst of his people. Number 2, King Adam was tasked to perform the role of a priest. Now, if I was to tell you that Adam is functioning as a king in Genesis chapter 1, most people would say, yeah, that makes sense, because Adam was told to rule over and to subdue all of God's creation in Genesis 1, 27 through 28. But the idea that Adam is also supposed to function as a priest might be new to some people. But let me give you the evidence for this. So in chapter 2, verse 15, the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to do a couple of things: to cultivate it and to keep it. And any person reading the Hebrew Bible and seeing these two verbs together, would know immediately what is being described of Adam's vocation. And they would look at these two verbs, the verb to cultivate and to keep, which in Hebrew are avad and shamar. And the connection of those two verbs are regularly used with the regular work of priest. Let me demonstrate that to you. So here in Numbers chapter 3, verse 6, God says, bring the tribe of Levi near and set them before Aaron the priest. All right, so we got the Levitical priest here, that they may serve him, okay? They shall perform, Hebrew verb shamar, the duties for him and the whole congregation before the tent of meeting to do the service, the verb avad, of the temple. Next verse. They shall also keep, shamar, all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, along with the duties of the sons of Israel, to do the service, verb avad, of the temple. So twice in this passage, we have both verbs being used of the duties of the temple. And even when the temple is, at least from the perspective of the prophet Ezekiel, going to be restored, we can see in chapter 44, verse 14, that God, yet I will appoint them, namely the priest, to keep charge, to shamar, keep charge of the house, all of its service, again, the verb avad, and of all that shall be done in it. Okay, so Adam is doing the work of a priest. We know that later there are going to be these priests, and of course, priests work in a temple. And then when the temple is restored, God again is going to set up priests, and they're going to be shamaring and avading. All right, so Adam is functioning not just as a king, but also as a priest. And where do priests work? Priests work in temples. Therefore, Eden is a temple sanctuary. Point number 3, Eden was remembered as a sanctuary. Again, we're going to look at Ezekiel. And Ezekiel's going to talk about the king of Tyre. And he is going to wax eloquently. He's going to just layer on the poetry here. And he's going to tell us just how far the king of Tyre has actually fallen. Okay, because the king of Tyre, he had it made. He had it great until he started to sin. And the way that the poetry comes out is going to compare him to how great he had it by portraying him as actually in Eden. Now, this is poetry. This is not literal. Like the king of Tyre, that human king was not actually in Eden. This is part of the poetry. But notice the language that's being used here. You were in Eden, the garden of God. So far, so good. We already know that. You were on the holy mountain of God. You know, the holy mountain is where God actually dwells in a temple. And you sinned, therefore I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God. So he has profaned the mountain of God, and you profaned your sanctuary. So there we actually have the language there of sanctuary combined with Eden, combined with the garden of God, combined with the holy mountain and the imagery there of the temple. So we have a lot of evidence here. Again, it's not just spelled out in one verse. It's spelled out in a variety of verses. And when you put it all together, it's clear that God planted Eden to foreshadow the temple. God planted Adam to be basically the high priest in this particular temple. And actually, you can go and you can read the description of this figure in Ezekiel 28, and he actually is decked out with the description of what the high priest would actually wear in his vest and the vest plate. And then, of course, you can see here that Eden is described and it was remembered as a sanctuary. Okay. So this is going to be important because we're going to see that the portrayal of Eden as a place where God is dwelling in a quasi tabernacle temple sort of setting, and that's going to be reaffirmed throughout the Bible. We're going to see it particularly in Genesis. So let's talk about Abraham. Okay, so we know from Genesis chapter 12 that God makes a covenant with Abraham. Abraham is going to get the land. He's going to have all these descendants, and he's going to have a blessing. And the blessing, of course, is going to undo the curse of Adam. So in chapter 12, verse 7, we read, Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So notice how Abram, short for Abraham, how he responded to this promise. So Abram built an altar there to Yahweh, who had appeared to him. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to Yahweh and called upon the name of Yahweh. This is the first occurrence of the location Bethel in the Old Testament. All right. So what do we have here? After Yahweh gives him these promises. First of all, we can see in this, we have the reaffirmation of the promise made to Adam. Adam was told that he was going to rule the world, Genesis 1:27 through 28. And here, Abraham is told that he also is going to rule the world with his descendants. To your descendants, I'm going to give this land. Okay. So Abraham is going to be the new Adam, mainly and namely that Abraham is going to take over this role that Adam had, not just the king of the world, but also a priest. We can see that he built an altar, and altars, of course, are going to foreshadow the big altar that is present in the tabernacle first, and then ultimately in the Jerusalem temple. We have the first occurrence of Bethel, and that's just a Hebrew phrase that means house of God. We know what a house of God is. That's a temple, okay? He pitched his tent, and what is a foreshadowing tent with the altar? That, of course, is the tabernacle. So the connection of altar and tent together is really going to resonate with those tabernacle foreshadowings. And then, of course, he worships here. So it looks like he's setting up a location to where God can come and dwell. We've got a tabernacle. We've got the house of God. We have an altar where he can make these sacrifices. We've got the reaffirmation of the role of Adam, and we've got worship taking place in this temple setting. Sounds like the recreation of an Edenic sanctuary. There are a lot of those elements that are there, right? And it doesn't just happen with Abraham. It also happens with Isaac. Genesis chapter 26, starting in verse 24. Yahweh appeared to him, to Isaac, the same night and said, I'm the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of Yahweh and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. That's chapter 26, verses 24 through 25. We have a lot of the same elements in the story that we saw in Genesis chapter 12. Again, we have the reaffirmation, promises made to Adam. So it's pointing you backwards to Adam in the same way that the things that were said about Adam are pointing you forward in the story. So we have the blessing that I'm going to bless you. And of course, God said that God was going to bless Adam and multiply him. And the multiplication there is multiplying image-bearing human beings, image-bearing people that are reflecting and worshiping the Creator God to the world. All right. He creates an altar and is paired with a tent. So again, you have the foreshadowing there of the tabernacle where God is going to come down and dwell, and we have an act of worship. So a lot of these elements here, again, showing that the function of Eden as a sanctuary where God is going to, or God was dwelling, and God is going to dwell among his people, this is reappearing in Genesis. We just kind of overlook it and we read through it because we see these little details here and we don't put them all together. So we got Abraham, we got Isaac. What about Jacob? Well, the portrayal with Jacob is actually the strongest. To me, I think this is the strongest indicator of this sort of theology. And this is in chapter 28, where he has the dream of the ladder going up to heaven. All right. So starting in verse 11, Jacob, came to a certain place. Remember that. That's an important detail. He came to a certain place. He spent the night there because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and he put it under his head, functioning as a pillow, and lay down on that place. Again, that place. It's repeated here. Had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth, and its top was reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, Yahweh stood above it and said, I am Yahweh, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. What do we have here? Okay. So we have the place, not mentioned once, but twice. And place, the Hebrew noun makom, is regularly used in the Old Testament to describe not just a generic, random, insignificant place, but particularly the place where God is going to dwell in the midst of his people. And I'm going to show you this in the next slide. Okay. And we have the ladder, and the function of the ladder is to connect heaven to earth, and God is at the top of the ladder. So, of course, this allows God's presence to come down to this particular place. You got a place that is opened up to God coming down and dwelling. We have many of the promises given to Adam reaffirmed. We have the fact that Adam is going to rule the land. We have his expanding dominion. that his rule is going to expand to the entire earth, and of course the multiplying of all of his descendants. So again, we have all the promises of Adam being reaffirmed in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, a few verses later, we're not done with Genesis 28. We're not done with Jacob. All right. So we ended in verse 14. What about verse 18? Jacob rose early in the morning. He took the stone that he put under his head, his little pillow, okay, and he set it up. He set that stone up as a pillar and poured oil on its top. He called the name of that place Bethel. And then he said, the stone which I've set up as a pillar will be God's house. And all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. All right. So lots of elements here. Okay. First of all, he pours out oil in a sacrificial manner. Okay. He's not just wasting it. He's pouring it out as a sacrifice. He does it on a newly built pillar. And this pillar is going to turn into God's house. And actually, there's a lot of Jewish traditions, extra biblical Jewish traditions, that this particular stone, this pillar, became the cornerstone of the Jerusalem temple that Solomon built. Okay, so we have kind of a foreshadowing here. We have the offering of tithes. We know that tithes are given to the Levitical priest. Where do they work? They work in the temple. And he actually names the place Bethel. He names it the house of God that was already foreshadowed earlier with Abraham. So you got all of these elements here of a temple sanctuary where God is going to come and dwell in the midst of his people. It's in a particular place. And we can see that the function of Eden, which is not just a place of paradise. That's the key thing. It's a place where human beings are in a temple location where God is present there and God is dwelling in the midst of his people, and the people are functioning as priest to God, mediating his goodness, his rule, and his reign to the world. That's their function. All right. So let's talk about this issue of place. This will be the last slide that we look at here. Because place, and let me tell you, there are like 40 different times in the Old Testament to where this word place functions as a very specific location where God desires to dwell in the midst of his people. So in Exodus chapter 15, verse 17, you will bring them and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, O Yahweh, which you have made for your dwelling. Notice right there, it's the place where God is going to dwell. It is his sanctuary, just like we saw in Eden. O Lord, which your hands have established. Okay, Leviticus 6:16, Aaron and his sons, the priest, shall eat what is left of it, and it shall be eaten as unleavened cakes in a holy place. Where? In the court of the tent of meeting, they shall eat it. Okay, so you got the tent of meeting, all right, another name for the tabernacle, and that is the holy place. That's the place where God is dwelling. It's not just a generic place, it's a very specific place where God dwells. Deuteronomy chapter 12, but you shall seek Yahweh at the place where Yahweh your God will choose from all your tribes to establish his name there for, there it is again, his dwelling. And there you shall come. And this is Deuteronomy foreshadowing the location of Jerusalem. Later in Deuteronomy, in 31:11, when all Israel comes together before Yahweh your God at the place which he will choose, you shall read this law in front of all the children in their hearing. Okay, so we have this place. It's not a random place. It's the place that God has chosen. In Nehemiah, after the Babylonian exile and their return, Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 9 indicates that if you return, the Jews, if you Jews return to me, to God, and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the most remote part of the heavens, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place, not just any place, the place where I've chosen to cause my name to dwell. It's a particular place where God is going to dwell. It's his dwelling place. And then Ezekiel 43, verse 7, he said to me, God said to Ezekiel, son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell among the sons of Israel forever. And he is talking about the restored temple. In the restored temple, God again is going to come and dwell personally. He's going to dwell there. His rule is going to be there. His throne is going to be there. That's going to be the place of his feet. And so when you see there in Genesis chapter 28, the place where there's a stone set up, and it's called Bethel, it's the stone upon which the Jerusalem temple is going to be built. That is not just a generic place. It's a place where God is going to dwell. And so you have, I think, with all of these passages, and I'll kind of go all the way back to the beginning, we have this constant theme that God wants to dwell in the midst of his people. God's plan is to restore Eden, and that's not just something that's going to happen in the future. It's something God is constantly doing by setting up these opportunities for him to come and dwell in the midst of his people. You can see it with the patriarchs. We're going to see it with God coming and dwelling on the mountain. We're going to see it with the tabernacle. We're going to see it with the temple. And you can see it with the tabernacling presence of Jesus in John chapter 1, verse 14. And of course, we can see it with the body of Christ, the church, which is outright called the temple in several places in the New Testament. So I think this is a really interesting way to kind of put all this information together and organize it in a way to show that God's plan to restore Eden is not just something that kind of gets off the ground at the end of Genesis chapter 3 and you don't hear about it for a bunch of books. No, it continues to be unveiled in the narrative of Genesis if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. If you find it compelling, if you find it interesting, if you disagree with it, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Give us a subscribe, give us a like, and let us know in the comments what you think about this. My name is Dustin Smith. Have a good day. Take care. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.